The following is a conversation with Gil Vega, Chief Information Security Officer at Veeam. Gil's journey through the world of cybersecurity has seen him safeguarding billion-dollar financial marketplaces to crafting security strategies for the US Department of Energy and Immigration and Customs Enforcement. With a career woven with diverse experiences, including combat operations as a US Army veteran, Gil brings a unique perspective to the table. At Veeam, his role shapes the security framework, ensuring a robust defence for not only Veeam, but also our customers against the ever-evolving threat of cyber attacks. And now, for Cyber Security Awareness Month, Gil Vega.
Anthony, good morning, good evening. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, good stuff. Hey, Gil, this is a really exciting episode for me because it's timed really well. We've got the Cyber Security Awareness Month happening in October. Not that shouldn't mean that you shouldn't be aware of cyber attacks and malware every other part of the year, but it's very pertinent in October. It's a designated month. So it's great to have our CISO on the show to talk about all things cyber. So I think we've got tons to talk about in this next 35 minutes or so, but I think I want to kick off and start the show by asking you, how did you become a CISO? What led Gil to become CISO of Veeam Software?
Wow. It's a long journey. I'll try to keep it short. Otherwise, we're going to take up the entire hour with that story. But I've been doing this for better part of 25 years, even before the term of art CISO was even coined in our industry. Started in 98, working technology, but focusing on the assurance component of technology. And fast forward to my service in the U.S. government in Washington, D.C., where I spent about 20 years working in various DoD, Intel, community organizations, culminating with my role as the CISO for the U.S. Department of Energy, where I, oversaw the nuclear weapons complex, the national laboratory complex, and the cybersecurity executed there. It prepared me well for a career in financial services, and then finally here at Veeam. And I think one of my greatest attributes, if you'll call it that, is all the scar tissue that I've gained over the years from a cybersecurity perspective, including being involved in lots of pretty significant cyber events when I was in the U.S. government.
Yeah. So did I hear that right in saying, obviously, pretty cool to hear a lot of nuclear stuff, and that seems very, very high-end and very, very high-risk security type of situational, but did you not really start in IT? Is that kind of what I picked up on at the start?
Yeah.
Found your way in there?
I did. I was in the military right out of high school. I gained my college education as an adult and started my career as a police officer in Washington, D.C., and transitioned into technology in the mid-90s. And it was sort of a nexus of technology, security, investigations, insider threat that led me to this idea of wanting to become a CISO, and I've lasted this long, so maybe I'm doing something right.
Yeah, and I guess you mentioned the fact that, look, the term CISO has really risen to prominence in the last, maybe 3 to 4 to 5 years, right? Before that, I know that I never really came across it, and I've been in tech for 20 years now, right? So what is a CISO, number one? Because I think that's a question a lot of people do ask still in today's IT landscape.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think the role is still being defined, and it's being defined because a CISO is a different role in different types of organizations, different industries, different size organizations, and so forth. But generally, I think a CISO role has become much more strategic and much less tactical these days. When I started this years ago, the CISO role was almost completely tactical, where the expectations were something as simple as making sure your website didn't get defaced, or ensuring that your infrastructure is patched and kept up to date. Today, especially in larger companies or companies that are need to be responsive to regulatory pressures related to oversight, say you're in a critical industry, the role has become and has needed to become much more strategic, from implementing these broad enterprise risk management programs to leading technology acquisitions and leading due diligence efforts around acquisitions, to I said it before, managing and cultivating those regulatory relationships. Those are not tactical activities and require really some seasoning to be able to handle those effectively. And finally, cybersecurity has really become, in most industries and for many large companies, the number one operational risk being managed by the board of directors. So being able to manage up to the board of directors, keeping them informed, being responsive to board subcommittees on the topic of cybersecurity and how the company is managing that, as well as how we're supporting the development of new products and influencing new features related to cybersecurity have all become sort of table stakes for today's strategic CISO. And I think it really marks a pretty significant change in the way CISOs are not only engaged in this day to day, but how they're viewed across the landscape. I've run into CISOs who manage all of those things I've mentioned for large multinational conglomerates who haven't been technical in many years. So there's a need to remain abreast of all the changes in technology, but you've also got to be able to have a great team around you that can support you. I've said it before. You've probably heard me say it, that cybersecurity isn't my responsibility; it's everybody's responsibility. And having a solid team around you to help manage all of these moving parts is absolutely critical to the survival in this role, because CISO also stands for career is soon over if you're not doing these things effectively.
Yeah, you touched on a lot of things. I think I wanted to bring it back to the battle scar part, and I think this whole notion of that a CISO, is a bit different to say a CTO or a CIO. But in my world of more of a chief technology officer, right? Where that typically has always been sort of a very hands-on visionary. Let's get technical. Let's look at what's coming, and let's look at what we can do moving forward type of role. Where I feel like what you've talked about with regards to battle scars, experience, regulatory compliance. That's all something that from my point of view, a technical CTO doesn't necessarily have to do. And I think that's kind of where we all find different paths in our careers, right? And in some paths, you might start technical and then you branch out into this regulatory space. You might then become business orientated. You might become good to talk to the C-suite, which is a big skill in itself and it comes with experience. So all these things come into play to sort of separate the differences between what I see as a CTO, a CISO, and even a CIO. Maybe a CISO and a CIO are a bit more blurred to me in this day, because I guess the CIO came out of nowhere for me a while ago, years ago now. So now that we've got the CISO and the CIO, I think that's the biggest thing that people probably find they try to struggle with the differentiator. I think that the chief technology officer is an easy one to differentiate, but the CIO and the CISO are the ones that people might find a little bit more confusing.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think the role of the CIO has changed just as much as the role of the CISO for many companies and industries over the past several years. I think larger companies are expecting, more than sort of boxes and wires management, IT director type roles that traditionally have gone to CIOs. CIOs have become much more visionary and critical to the business, from not only managing the internal infrastructure and enabling all types of business process, but becoming, quite frankly, the steward for exploiting all of the important information that a company has and creating sales opportunities out of that information. So I think the expectations perhaps have grown even larger for CIOs than they have for CISOs. CIOs are so much more involved in revenue generation for many large companies, especially in the technology space, because of their unique positioning in the company, having access to all types of important, sales and customer information, and being able to exploit that, I think, has become a key focus recently for them.
Yeah. Do you think, given that there's been an explosion of CISOs and the role has been, something that a lot of larger organizations have seen to fill more than, say, hasn't really reached the lower tier of organizations just at this point? I think you have to reach a certain size to bring or to justify a full-time CISO. So what's your take on the quality of the CISOs that you see and you talk to? Because my take is, so a few of these guys are probably not quite there or not quite ready with the experience that would justify that position, because it's a very important position, right? So do you have any fears or any, I guess, sort of comments on the general quality of the CISOs that are out? That's a loaded question, I know, but you kind of get what I'm talking about there in terms of it's 2023, cybersecurity is huge. Let's get a CISO in.
Yeah. I do want to mention that it's not just guys anymore. It's the gals too.
Oh, of
I've seen
course, yes.
this explosion in this space of women taking on significant leadership roles in this space. I think that's fabulous, not only for companies but for CISO roles in general. I think what differentiates people who want to be a CISO, I think, is the passion and the desire to take this job very personally, right? And be very defensive of a company. And I think that passion is pretty unique in the world of cybersecurity. Obviously, there are going to be different levels of CISO roles, and some of these smaller roles that are called CISOs are sometimes double or triple hatted in an organization,
Yeah.
where a CISO was also the CIO, and he's a CTO, or she's leading different parts of the technology program. I think there's sort of there's a journey, there's a career journey for people who find themselves with significant security responsibilities in a company, leading them to become more specialized in this space and develop themselves more as a strategic thinker versus the tactical thinker that perhaps they started out in. And I think that's honestly, it reminds me of my career journey, where I felt that every role that I ever took was seasoning me for the next significant role, that led to my coming out from a very tactical start of my career to becoming a much more strategic player in government agencies and companies.
Yeah, I love that tactical versus strategic and that evolution. I think that actually encapsulates it pretty well, right, in terms of that journey and how you get to that point. So just tell me, what's a typical day then in the role of a CISO at Veeam Software?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably one of the reasons why I love this job, because it's for 25 years I've never had the same experience day to day. It's literally different every day. And in a lot of cases, it's checking in with my senior leadership team, making sure that I have a good handle on the day's events, making sure that I have the information to be able to inform our senior leadership here of any ongoing issues or outages, working very closely with our CIO team. And I did want to mention one of the changes that we've seen in the industry related to the relationship between a CIO and a CISO is that oftentimes they're peers now. Whereas in the past, and not too distant past, CISOs would often work for the CIOs. So I think there's been a recognition that there has to be a healthy tension there between the CISO and the CIO of an organization. And here at Veeam, we have exactly that. Nate Kurtz is our wonderful CIO here at Veeam, and he and I and our teams work very, very closely together. So part of my day is making sure that we're in sync with that team and engaged in all of their projects, responding to customer inquiries and catching up on the news, because there is such a geopolitical nexus between what CISOs are trying to get done and in the cybersecurity space. Geopolitics now affects the cyber threat landscape more than it's ever done before. And let's face it, we're living in a time of increased threats across the globe. They're worse than ever, and you could say that every day. So I really believe that an uninformed CISO really can't do the job well. I spent a lot of time not only understanding new technologies and approaches on a daily basis, but really getting in tune with the changes in the threat landscape, the global news, politics, conflicts, and so forth.
Yeah, so you're keeping busy, just quietly. So when you start talk about that, we're talking about it's multifaceted, right? Because you mentioned it early on in terms of, being tactical and strategic. But I guess from a Veeam perspective, what you're doing is you're looking not so much first and foremost, I would expect at the actual, say, Veeam back replication, even though that's part of it, right? But ideally, you're actually working with the CIO to make sure that Veeam itself as an entity, as the company, is kind of up and about when it comes to these threats, right? Like it's not, I think a lot of people would go, oh, well, Gil will check out VBR and we'll check out like backup for Office 365 and see what's going on there. But that's actually probably not what it is, more so than just making sure the company as a whole is prepared in case the worst happens in this threat landscape that you mentioned.
Yeah. There are quite a few focus areas for our group here. We call ourselves Global Information Security. Veeam is a global company, which I think adds significant risk to our company. We operate in dozens of countries around the globe with over 5,000 employees. So in addition to the general internal mission focused on the defense and resiliency of the company, myself and my team spent a lot of time with the product team, helping them understand the current threat landscape. We've got a cyber threat intelligence team that tracks many of the adversaries that we feel are a threat to the company and to our customers. And that information makes its way to our product development teams, and that informs some of the features that are new to our products. There's a really key focus, and we'll probably get into this a bit later when we talk about Cybersecurity Awareness Month, that our internal efforts focus on making sure that our Veeam employees are the best prepared in industry to help us defend this company against the thousands of attacks we receive on a daily and weekly basis. And we put a lot of calories into making sure our employees are able to be phish proof. That is the number one vector for this company and many other companies that are customers of ours.
Yeah, and I think I can speak to that, right? I mean, all of a sudden, the laptops that we had, the home screens were all about, making sure that we're secure, that we're safe. I've not seen that level of preparedness put on, an organization like I've had at Veeam in the last sort of, I guess, 18 to 24 months, right? We take courses that we have to sort of be ready for. We've got to go through some learning to make sure that we're aware of the threat landscape. So, I think a lot of us, and I think in technology, a lot of tech companies, a lot of tech people kind of wrongly assume that they're going to be okay because they're in this world. I'm never going to get done, right? I think that's kind of a lot of the mentality that we have in this industry because we feel that we're pretty much ready for it. But I think you'd understand that that's not the case, right? And there's a lot of us in this company that might be a little bit, overconfident in the fact that we will never get attacked or we won't get phished.
We've seen a bit of that. We've seen some of our more technical employees, some of our more experienced and tenured employees fail for some of our phishing campaigns, and it's a significant aha moment for people that were actively phishing from our internal team. Look, Gartner is predicting that in the next couple of years, the consumerization of AI-enabled fraud will be responsible for changing everything we understand about the current threat landscape. And the only way that we can counteract this new threat is by making sure that our employees are up to the task. They also tell us that human failure will result in more than 50% or be responsible for more than 50% of the significant cyber events coming forward. So making sure that our employees are prepared is one of the key focus areas, I think, in perpetuity for this program, and I think it's a strategy that a lot of our customers are embracing as well.
Absolutely, I know that I've obviously picked up a few of the phishing attempts. I've submitted them, and you get a good tick when you do that. But I must admit, I don't think it was actually through the Veeam email, but it was on my other personal email where I did click on a link, and as soon as I clicked it, I went, what have I done? Like I literally knew straight away that it was really, really well written. And I kind of went, yep, no worries. I just didn't think for a second. And then it was just like it was on my mobile. Not that that means a lot because you can still get, Pegasus can still, all those sort of rootkits can go on your mobile. I was still worried for a second. I rebooted it straight away. But I fell for it is what I'm trying to say. And I knew straight away that I had, but it didn't stop me clicking. So, and that's me being pretty aware. So, you take the general population around that without education, and it's very easy for someone to get, compromised.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a really interesting story because oftentimes people are ashamed of what they do online, and what we try to encourage our users and what many companies try to encourage them is if they make a mistake, it's okay, right? Let us know, report it. One of the key focus areas of our anti-phishing program here at Veeam and across many companies is to create a sensor out of every one of our employees. So Anthony, you were a sensor on that event, right? I'm sure you reported it. And if had that been a legitimate phishing attempt by an adversary of Veeam, your report will allow us to put actions on potentially 5,000 other employees that have been targeted by that event as well. So reporting these things, being conscientious to do that, I think is one of the most important things that anyone can do to be phish proof.
Yeah. So just on that, a question kind of without notice. I've been doing a series of road shows over the past month, ransomware myth bustings, and we've had a very open and honest conversation with the group around, to that point, being open about an attack, being open about, a moment where you have been, compromised either personally or as a company, because sometimes we don't talk about it. I kind of felt like it was a ransomware anonymous scenario, right? Where all of a sudden one person opened up, and then everyone opened up, and it became a really good story. That aside, the question I thought of was, what are you more, I guess scared probably isn't the right way. What are you more worried about, or what are you more sort of concerned at happening, a breach or a actual cyber event that actually, is malicious in intent? Because that's the two different types that we've seen in the world at the moment. The breach where some data gets lost through a misconfigured API or whatever it might be, and you that's more of a brand reputational situation, or the actual more serious ransomware attack that looks to either encrypt the data, hold it to ransom, or actually be destructive.
Yeah, I don't want to experience either again. I think it really depends on what industry you're in, how you're regulated, what type of customers you have, that will drive which one of those is higher on the list of concerns. I think overall, from a perspective of recovery from both of those types of events, the ability to be resilient in the face of an inevitable attack, I think is an area that companies should continue to invest. You've heard us say it before. It's almost cliche. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. You will be attacked.
Scary.
May be attacked successfully. You may be breached. Your ability to have a solid backup strategy that is exercised, and that the backup and recovery processes in your company work, will become the single most important component to maintaining defenses against what I think are existential to some companies. I mean, we've seen companies go bankrupt in the face of ransomware attacks. We've seen companies go bankrupt in the face of breaches of significant amounts of personally identifiable information or personal health records. So being able to not only monitor, respond in real time, but also prepare yourself to be resilient in the face of a significant successful event directed against you, I think is going to be more important going forward, especially with some of the things I've already talked about related to AI and automation of some of these attacks that we're starting to see now, much more commonplace in the future.
Absolutely. Let's get to that. But firstly, leading on from that, I think it's a good time to talk about Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And you mentioned, the fact that it's not a matter of if but when. Why do we need a whole month to highlight this scenario when we talk about it all the time? Like, I guess we do kind of understand why we're going to highlight it, but what's your thoughts on this whole month now being dedicated to cybersecurity awareness?
Yeah, I don't think a month is enough. Like, I think it should.
Yeah,
I think it should be all year. And here at Veeam, we keep this topic at the top of mind for all of our employees year round. You know, this Cybersecurity Awareness Month was a global effort that's led here in the United States, mostly by the Department of Homeland Security. And it's really a good opportunity for us to spend a whole month focusing on our community that's so interconnected, that is so technology dependent. And really, from my perspective, it's an opportunity for us to create disciples across companies and organizations to help us share the burden of keeping our companies safe. This year, Cybersecurity Awareness Month's theme is securing our world, which is it's pretty significant when you think
broad,
about
right? That's a big statement there. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned it before. We're so interconnected. The supply chains are, dozens of layers deep, and you've heard it before. Our adversaries only need to be successful once, so we've got to be successful every single time. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to reward great behavior. It's an awesome opportunity for us to remind people of their responsibilities. And like I said, it creates an army of people for us focused on similar things for an entire month. And I've said it before, our people are the most important component of the cybersecurity chain of defense, and making sure that they're aware of not only their responsibilities, but providing them with solid strategies to become fish-proof is critical. One of the things I like to talk about is making sure that we always display a healthy dose of skepticism online.
Okay.
Right? Don't believe everything you read, right? If you get an email asking you to do something that doesn't seem right, follow up on it, out of band, with a phone call, with a visit, to make sure that the action that you're being requested to take is legitimate. It seems silly, right? It seems like we should be able to recognize these things without having to do that, but we've seen here.
I think it's practical. I think, like you said, it's the way of the world moving forward, and it's only going to get worse, and it's going to get more and more difficult to detect what is wrong, what is right, what is a fish, what isn't, who is real, who isn't. That it's scary in a way, right? Well, not in a way. It absolutely is scary.
It is, and the innovation on the other side is incredibly impressive. It's just really impressive to see what some of these groups are up to these days.
Yeah, I think I mentioned, I started this early in the year. I remember at Veeam, if people that saw my demo that I did on main stage, where I actually simulated a ransomware attack. I built that with ChatGPT literally within a couple of minutes, right? And then tweaked it a little bit, got it to do some things. And when I executed it and what it did to the website that I hit, it looked like a real attack, right? And it did encrypt the data. And obviously there were parts of that were a bit smoke and mirrors, but that was me in 5 minutes, and I'm a hack at best, right? So I've been using this narrative all year. It's scary to think that if I could have done that, what the targeted guys that really, really want to do damage and inflict damage and are running these ransomware and cyber attack companies as businesses effectively, what they can do with this technology advancement that we're seeing, especially around AI.
Yeah, it's really incredible when you start to scratch the surface on the deep web, and we've built an entire cyber threat intelligence team here that's plugged into some of the forums in the deep web, and we can see real time what it is they're up to and what they're bragging about, and which victims they're targeting, how they're targeting them, what their tactics are, what types of malware they're using. But these larger organizations, as you said, they're a business. That's in some cases Fortune 500 size businesses focused on this.
Yep.
With CFOs and business plans and objectives. And it takes me back to, some of the advice that I give to customers and others in this industry about focusing on the basics. There's a joke of these two guys in the woods, and they see a black bear. One of them bends over and ties his shoes, and the guy says to him, "Hey, you're not going to be able to outrun that bear." He says, "I don't have to. I just have to outrun you." It's the same thing in cybersecurity, right? If you can focus on the minimum components, these organizations that are targeting you, they have limited resources to continue that targeting of you.
Mm.
And to the extent that you can raise their cost with solid strategies to prevent these types of breaches, in many cases, they'll move on to the next victim. I mean, we've talked about AI and automation and all kinds of higher level hacking and cyber attack topics. But what I tell people is focus on the basics, things like application whitelisting, patching your apps, making sure your OSs are up to date, managing your privileged users. And then finally, implementing that foolproof backup and restore strategy that you exercise and that works, I think, are the key things that companies and organizations, even those that aren't as resourced as some of the larger companies, if you focus on those types of issues in your company, I think you'll find that that perhaps the attackers will move on to someone who doesn't focus on those things.
Isn't it amazing that you're still talking about effectively the basics that we've all known about and talked about for years, but it's still the point of entry that's most likely to happen effectively because, someone doesn't, do least privilege as an open API. I mean, I'm guilty of this when I used to run, and it's part of the reason I make a joke. It's part of the reason why I left the actual infrastructure game and having a responsibility for a platform and it all falling on me. I just didn't want to be part of an attack, right? I didn't want that on my head. I didn't want it on my brand. I didn't want it as part of my life. It affects my livelihood, right? And I think I realized that 7 or 8 years ago before I joined Veeam. Pretty happy that I'm on the other side preaching to people to make sure you're protected. But I think even back then, we weren't patching. Like we just didn't do it because it was a pain in the ass, right? Like, and it was probably a slightly different. We're talking 7 to 10 years ago now. It is slightly different today. I think people understand they have to do it, but I still feel there's a huge majority that still have the mentality that I had and others I know in the industry had even 7 to 10 years ago, which is like, it'll never happen to us. Let's not worry about it. We'll be okay. And you just can't think that way today.
Yeah, you absolutely can. It's such a target-rich environment full of companies and organizations that are still 10 to 15 years in the past that don't focus on those things. I wouldn't be able to sleep at night if I worked for a company that couldn't do the bare minimum. It would just be miserable.
Yeah. Hey, Tim, and you mentioned like the targets, right? Like I think we've seen some pretty significant hits in the past couple of weeks. We've seen MGM, we've seen a heap of high-profile hits. Do you think that these companies out there, the businesses of cyber attacks and ransomware companies, do you think that they go for the big ones every so often just to remind the world that, hey, we're here, we want to make a statement, but really what they want to do is go for the more bottom end of the pyramid, the low-hanging fruit? Where do you see it? Is there a balance that they take, or is it just like you said, they just keep on, try and move to the next, try and move to the next?
Well, if there's anything that we know about these well-resourced adversaries that are focused on digital crimes, fraud, and hacking, we know that most of them are full of hubris. So being able to brag that you were the group that took down MGM, one of the largest resort companies in the world, operating multiple casinos across the globe, and cost them millions of dollars a day while they tried to recover from that. That's a pretty significant bragging point. We've seen these bragging points across the internet. We've seen them in open source. We've seen them on the deep web. They're taking credit for a lot of those things. Now, besides the damage inflicted on a company like MGM, I'm not sure how much these groups were able to monetize those attacks for themselves. So I think you're right. I think the focus for these groups is going to continue to be the small and mid-sized businesses that oftentimes have no other option than to pay a ransom in order to restore their operation. So that focus is going to continue to remain there. I think every once in a while you'll see a huge concern like MGM get caught up in something like this. And what I'm learning about the MGM attack is very similar to some of the things we've already talked about. The lack of focus on the simple things, the fundamentals of IT and cybersecurity program.
Yeah, let's finish off. We've got probably about 5 or 6 minutes left. I wanted to touch on our industry as a whole, right? Because I think, we're a backup data protection company in our roots. There's a big sort of, I wouldn't call it an over-rotation in the industry, but there's a lot of companies out there, talking and spruiking their security wares. Where do you see Veeam sitting in that landscape today? I mean, we've had a really good publicity released with the Wall Street Journal. We've done some great marketing there. Where do you see Veeam sitting in this whole notion of is security backup?
Yeah, you've heard me say many times that our focus here at Veeam is on resiliency and being able to recover from the inevitable attack, and having delivered products to our customers that allow them to be resilient in the face of these ever expanding types of attacks, I think is one of the most valuable components in a CISO's arsenals. A lot of our conversations with our customers are with CISOs these days, right? Not just the tactical CISOs, but the strategic CISOs who are looking at programs in a world of declining resources and the ability to make huge investments in cybersecurity. I think the smart CISOs now are focused on this idea of resiliency, being able to recover quickly and confidently from an inevitable attack. And I think Veeam isn't a cybersecurity company, but I think our leadership understands that we are becoming an indispensable tool in the world of CISOs trying to manage cybersecurity and resiliency for their businesses.
Brilliant. Love that. That's great. I talk about it as a tool set, right? I talk about three facets to it: the education at the front end, the tooling that you use at the middle to basically back up, recover, be resilient, then also the business process, which creates that BCDR loop cycle. I'm very big on that. So you've called it out beautifully there. So I'm glad that, I can go back and talk to those guys that I spoke to over the couple of weeks, and I can maybe respond to the factors. Why is a regional CTO talking to me about security? Well, I think I hit the nail on the head, so I'm pretty happy with that. Hey, just to finish off, I think, again, we started off with what is a CISO. You explained it beautifully. I think there's a few people out there listening to this that might want to sort of understand, how do I make that next step? What's some advice or some industry or career advice you would give to someone looking to make that step to become a CISO?
Yeah, typically the CISOs will come out of the IT infrastructure space. You're seeing more and more come out of application development, which I think is really, that's great for the role, right? Because being able to understand this job from an application development or software engineering perspective is pretty unique. So we're seeing a lot of that. For those that are working more junior roles in general IT organizations, I think the best advice I can give you is to learn everything you can about the business of your business, how you make money, how the company's strategy is developed, and overall how technology and cybersecurity fit into that overall strategy and revenue picture. Understanding that will lead you assuredly down the path of being a much more strategic thinker, being a business enabling CISO, which is what we all need to be. We're not your grandfather's CISO anymore. Can't just say no all the time. You've got to manage risk, and you've got to be able to understand the trade-offs associated with supporting the business. So just being more strategic in your thinking and availing yourself to some of these more strategic topics across the business, I think, is going to enable you to take that next step.
Awesome. Hey, Gil, thanks a lot for being on the Sound of Tech to Come. I think obviously this is the Sound of Tech to Come, which means that tech to come in this sense is a lot more attacks, a lot more sophistication, but I think a lot more companies ready with the right tooling to be able to, be resilient against the inevitable. So it's Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Great to have you on. This was a really insightful conversation. And again, thanks a lot for being on the show.